I always thought working night security would be easy money. At 22, I had dropped out of community college, moved into a tiny apartment outside of Chicago, and desperately needed something that paid better than fast food. My cousin Derek got me a security job at an old office building downtown. The place had once belonged to a law firm, but after COVID and layoffs, most of the building sat half empty. My shift was from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Sounded perfect. No customers, no boss hovering over me, just sitting in a chair watching cameras all night. At first, it actually was perfect. The building had 14 floors, but only 3 were still occupied. The rest were empty offices with dusty desks, unplugged computers, and abandoned cubicles. My main job was to do hourly patrols, make sure nobody broke in, and sign off on a clipboard. Easy. The first few weeks were boring in the best way possible. I'd bring energy drinks, watch YouTube on my phone, and occasionally walk around with a flashlight pretending I was in a horror movie. Then little things started happening. The first thing was the elevator. Every single night around 2:13 a.m., the elevator would stop on floor 11. Floor 11 was completely empty. No businesses, no workers, nothing. At first I assumed it was just some electrical issue because the building was old as hell. But eventually curiosity got the better of me. One night I rode the elevator up there myself after it stopped. The doors opened to total darkness. I remember the smell immediately. Dust and old carpet mixed with something damp. Like wet cardboard, I swept my flashlight around the hallway. Nothing. Just rows of abandoned offices. I laughed at myself for being nervous and was about to leave when I noticed one office door at the very end of the hall slightly open. Maybe 6 inches. That was weird because all unused offices were supposed to stay locked. I walked down slowly, flashlight shaking a little because I was tired and full of caffeine. As I got closer, I noticed the door wasn't an office. It was a storage room, and inside I heard movement. Not loud movement, just soft scraping, like someone dragging something slowly across the floor. I stopped immediately. Every instinct in my body told me to leave, but I also didn't want to look like an idiot if it turned out to be a maintenance worker. So I called out, "Security!" The scraping stopped instantly. Dead silence. I waited maybe 5 seconds. Then I heard breathing. Very slow breathing. My stomach dropped. I backed away immediately and said louder, "Who's in there?" No response. I should have called the police right then, but I didn't. Mostly because I was embarrassed. I kept thinking it was probably some homeless guy sneaking inside for warmth. I slowly pushed the storage room door open wider. The flashlight beam revealed shelves, broken office chairs, cardboard boxes, and plastic tarps hanging from the ceiling. Nobody there, but the breathing continued. I froze, because it wasn't coming from inside the room. It was coming from directly behind me. I turned so fast I nearly fell. Nothing was there. The hallway was empty, but I swear on everything I own that seconds before turning around. Someone had been standing inches behind me, breathing down my neck. I got back in the elevator and went downstairs immediately. I didn't tell anyone. That was my mistake, because after that night, things escalated. The security office had around 40 camera feeds. Most were useless. Empty hallways, empty stairwells, empty lobbies. A week later, around 3 a.m., I noticed movement on camera 27, floor 11. My chest tightened immediately. The camera showed the hallway outside that same storage room, and there was someone standing there, tall, wearing dark clothes, completely still. I leaned closer to the screen. The person appeared to be facing the camera directly. I grabbed the radio. Maintenance. Anyone on 11? Static. No answer. I zoomed the camera slightly. The image quality sucked, but I could tell something was wrong with the figure. Its proportions looked off. too tall. Its arms looked unusually long. And then suddenly the camera cut to static. I jumped so hard my chair rolled backward. A second later, the feed returned. The hallway was empty. I told myself it was probably interference. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. About 20 minutes later, the elevator dinged. My blood went cold because I hadn't called it. The doors slowly opened. Nobody inside. But the floor button for 11 was glowing. I remember standing there staring at it, trying to convince myself someone upstairs had pressed it earlier. Then the elevator doors began closing again. Right before they shut completely, I heard something whisper, "Come back." I didn't sleep for almost 2 days after that. I even considered quitting, but money was tight and my rent had just gone up. So I kept working. A few nights later, something happened that still messes with me years later. At around 1:40 a.m., the building fire alarm suddenly activated. Every light started flashing red. I grabbed my radio and began checking floors. Procedure required me to inspect everything before calling the fire department because false alarms happened a lot. Floor 3 was clear. Floor 5 was clear. Floor 8 was clear. Then I reached floor 11. The alarm lights flashed through the dark hallway like lightning. And at the end of the corridor, the storage room door was fully open. Inside, I could see movement. Not subtle movement this time. Someone was pacing back and forth rapidly. I immediately radioed downstairs for backup before realizing I was the only guard working. My hands were shaking badly. The pacing suddenly stopped. Then a voice from inside the room said, "You left me here." Sounded wrong. Not deep, not high, like multiple voices speaking together. I backed toward the elevator. Then every office door on the hallway slammed shut at once. The sound exploded through the floor. I actually screamed, and then footsteps started sprinting toward me from inside the storage room. Fast. Way too fast. I hit the elevator button repeatedly. The footsteps got closer. Closer. The elevator doors finally opened and I threw myself inside right as a black figure rounded the corner. The doors shut before I fully saw it. But I remember one thing clearly. His face looked pale and stretched, like skin pulled too tightly over a skull. I quit the next morning. I didn't even give notice. Months later, Derek told me something he'd learned from another guard. Apparently years before I worked there, a maintenance employee disappeared during renovations on floor 11. They found him dead weeks later inside a sealed storage wall after construction workers complained about a smell. According to Derek, people said the man had been accidentally trapped behind the wall overnight while workers sealed the area. The official story claimed he died of dehydration. But some workers believed he had scratched at the walls trying to get out because there were fingernail marks all over the inside. And after hearing that, I finally understood the whisper. "You left me here." When I was 20, I rented the upstairs room of an old house near Portland while attending college. The landlord was an older woman named Nancy who lived downstairs with her tiny dog. The house itself looked normal enough, but it had this weird isolated feeling because it sat at the end of a dead-end road surrounded by trees. At night, it got unbelievably dark. The upstairs had 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. The second room stayed empty most of the time because nobody wanted to rent it. Honestly, I loved living there initially. Cheap rent, quiet neighborhood, no roommates, perfect. The only thing I hated was my bedroom window. It faced directly toward the woods behind the house. During the day, it looked peaceful. At night, it looked like a black wall. You couldn't see more than a few feet past the grass. The first strange thing happened maybe a month after moving in. I woke up around 2 a.m. needing water. As I sat up in bed, I noticed movement outside my window. At first, I thought it was tree branches moving. Then I realized someone was standing there. A man, just staring in. I froze instantly. He was tall and incredibly skinny, wearing what looked like a dark hoodie. The problem was my room was on the second floor. There was no balcony, no ladder, nothing. The window was at least 20 feet off the ground. Yet somehow this man's face was level with mine. I blinked hard, convinced I was half asleep, and when I looked again, he was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I checked outside expecting to find maybe a tree branch close to the window that created some weird illusion. There was nothing. No way someone could stand outside that window. I almost convinced myself it had been a dream, until 3 nights later. This time I was fully awake playing video games with headphones on when something tapped the glass. 3 soft taps. I slowly turned. The man was back. Same dark hoodie, same pale face, smiling. My entire body locked up. Because this time there was no confusion. He was absolutely real. And somehow he was standing outside a second-floor window. I ripped my headphones off and stumbled backward. The second I moved, the smile disappeared. Then he slowly raised one finger to his lips, like he was telling me to stay quiet. I screamed for Nancy downstairs. By the time she came running up, the window was empty. Nancy checked outside with a flashlight while I tried explaining what I saw. She clearly thought I was either dreaming or losing it. But then she noticed something. There were muddy fingerprints on the outside of the window, way outside, too high for any normal person to reach. Nancy stopped smiling after that. She called the police. 2 officers searched the property but found nothing. They asked if maybe someone had climbed onto the roof somehow, but the roof angle made that nearly impossible. For the next week, I barely slept. Every sound outside made me panic. I started keeping my curtains closed constantly. Then came the worst night. I woke up around 3:30 a.m. because of scratching sounds. Slow scratching, directly against the glass. I sat frozen under my blanket listening. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The scratching stopped immediately. I slowly pointed the light toward the window. The curtains were slightly open, and I could see part of a face peeking through. Just one eye, wide open, watching me. I screamed and threw the flashlight itself at the window. The face vanished instantly. Nancy called the police again. This time officers found footprints in the mud behind the house. But the tracks suddenly stopped halfway through the backyard, like whoever made them had disappeared. The next day, Nancy finally admitted something to me. A previous tenant had moved out suddenly 6 months earlier, claiming someone kept watching her through the upstairs windows. Nancy thought the girl was paranoid. Now she wasn't so sure. I moved out 3 days later. About a year afterward, Nancy emailed me. Police had arrested a man living in the woods nearby after hikers discovered a hidden campsite. Inside the camp were binoculars, photos of houses, and dozens of pictures taken through bedroom windows. Some were mine. The police believed he used climbing equipment to reach second-floor windows late at night. But here's the part that still terrifies me. One of the photos showed me asleep in bed, taken from inside my room. My first apartment after college was in Phoenix. It was cheap for a reason. The building looked ancient. The hallway lights flickered constantly, and half the tenants seemed unstable. But I could afford it, so I signed the lease. I lived in apartment 206, directly across from apartment 204. The first thing I noticed about 204 was that nobody ever seemed to leave. Ever. The blinds stayed shut 24/7. No music. No TV sounds. Nothing. But sometimes late at night, I'd hear movement inside. Heavy movement, like furniture being dragged around. One night, while taking trash out, I noticed the apartment door slightly cracked open, just an inch. As I passed, I heard whispering inside. Several people whispering at once. I remember stopping because it sounded strange. Not like conversation. More like people repeating the same sentence over and over. Then the whispering stopped simultaneously. Complete silence. The apartment door slowly creaked shut. I hurried back to my apartment immediately. The next morning, I asked the landlord about it casually. He immediately got weird. He told me apartment 204 was occupied and changed the subject. Occupied by who? I never once saw anybody enter or leave. Weeks passed. Then one night around midnight, I heard knocking. 3 slow knocks. I assumed it was another tenant. When I opened the door, nobody was there. But apartment 204's door was open. Wide open this time. Inside was complete darkness. I should have ignored it. Instead, I called out, "Hello!" No answer. Then I heard crying. Very faint crying. Coming from inside the apartment. I stepped closer before common sense kicked in. Something felt horribly wrong. The air itself smelled rotten. Then suddenly the crying stopped. And a man's voice whispered from inside, "Can you help me?" I backed away immediately. The voice sounded weak but rehearsed somehow, like someone pretending to be hurt. Then another voice whispered from deeper inside, "Don't let him leave." I slammed my apartment door shut and locked it. About 30 seconds later, someone started scratching softly against my door from the hallway. Not knocking, scratching. I called the police. When officers arrived, apartment 204 was locked and silent. The landlord showed up looking irritated more than concerned. Eventually, police forced the apartment open. I'll never forget the expression on one officer's face after entering. The apartment was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no food, nothing, except for dozens of handwritten sentences covering the walls, all written repeatedly in black marker. "Don't look at them," the officer asked the landlord who rented the apartment. The landlord hesitated before admitting the tenant had supposedly died 2 months earlier. Yet someone had clearly been inside recently. There were fresh water bottles and cigarette ashes everywhere. Police searched the building but found nobody. After that night, things got worse for me specifically. Every night around 2 a.m., I'd hear whispering outside my door, sometimes crying, sometimes laughter. Once, I looked through the peephole and nearly passed out. Someone was standing inches away, staring directly back through it, smiling. A few days later, I found a note slipped under my door. It simply said, "You looked." That was enough for me. I packed my stuff and left that weekend. Months later, curiosity got the better of me and I searched the apartment online. I found an old local news article. Years earlier, police had discovered a group of squatters living secretly inside and used maintenance tunnels connected to the apartment building. Several tenants reported hearing voices through walls and vents late at night. One tenant from apartment 204 disappeared entirely before police uncovered the tunnels. His body was never found. And after reading that article, one detail suddenly made sense. The whispering never sounded like it came from inside the apartment. It sounded like it came from inside the walls.